morning. Some years ago I saw a TV show with Sam Neill. It was one of those kind of biographical interview shows, conversations around his life and what he thought and who he was. At one point Sam Neill said, they were talking about religion, "I've got no use for religion anymore. I've come to the point where I don't think religion has any purpose. It creates too much violence and conflict, and there's too many wars fought in the name of religion. I don't think we need religion anymore. In fact, the world would be better without religion." He says, "I've got science. Science helps me to understand who I am and the world around me. That's enough." I understand, I think, what Sam Neill is saying. I've heard those comments a lot. And there's truth that religion and religious people have used religion to create conflict, to judge who's in and out, who's included or excluded, and have often used violence to protect keep pure their faith and belief systems. They've been very legalistic in how they've promoted that faith or that belief system, and wars have ensued. But there's also a lot of culture and nationalism and politics around wars and around faith and how it's used. I don't think that's the whole story. And certainly when I listen to Jesus, it's not the kind of faith that he promotes. It's not what he's talking about when he talks about faith or God. And his way is not a way of judgment and exclusion and conflict and violence. It's a way of peace, a way of inclusion and bringing all people into the community together to share resources. The part on science that Sam Neill speaks of, I understand. I trained in science, I trained in biochemistry and cell pathology, and I worked in immunology. And I love the learning about the inner processes of the body, cells and systems and the biochemistry, the chemistry that makes life work. I also like physics. I like cosmology and the earth, the study of the earth and its beauty and wonders, the geology, I guess, and geography. Also psychology, taking us into the inner workings of the mind, the way we think and feel and what makes us tick at that level. These are wonderful things and help me to understand myself, what happens within me and around me, and how I engage with the world. But there's a deeper thing as well that's not covered in science, and science doesn't pretend to touch it. And that is, I guess, the spirit. The other part of me, not the material or the psychological, but the spiritual. That deep inner yearning for meaning and purpose in a different way. That I'm touched by in the way of Jesus and the spiritual wisdom of the ages, of the different faiths, and for me particularly Christianity. Of this spiritual tradition that helps me to understand myself in a deeper way and what it means to be a human being in this world and to grow and to journey into a deeper way of love and life and flourishing of all people. Science doesn't help me with that and doesn't pretend to. And there are scientists around like Richard Dawkins who believes that his science and his understanding of science means he can answer every question. And I'm afraid he can't, and doesn't help me. As I come this week again to the next part of the Sermon on the Mount after the Beatitudes in Matthew's story of Jesus, Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth and the light of the world." And I guess he's speaking to a group of people who represent the 95% of his population, who are impoverished on the edges, who are oppressed by the domination of Rome, but also lived under some of the harshness of the legal code of his religious system of politics and life in Jerusalem and Israel. And it wasn't always easy. You are the salt of the earth. The people who are blessed because of the poverty of spirit. The people who are blessed because you're merciful or mourn the state of the world in your life. Who hunger and thirst for justice and righteousness. Who are peacemakers, who are merciful, who are humble, and who are persecuted. He says you are the salt of the earth. But if the earth loses its saltiness, it's worthless and can, trampled on the ground. If it's watered down, if it's covered with impurities and dirt, it cannot be used for the purposes. In his world, salt was, I gather, a valuable commodity, used for preservation of food, but probably also as an antiseptic and many other things. And it was also a trading commodity, I understand. And the phrase, not worth your salt, probably comes from the time when a quantity of salt could be traded for a slave. And if that slave proved worthless or useless or lazy, they weren't worth their salt. And if they weren't worth their salt, and if salt loses its flavour, it's useless. I think in reflecting on that, Jesus, for me, is saying each of us brings a flavour, a particularity of who we are to the world. And when we are able to be truly who we are called and created and made and destined to be, when we're free to do that and offer that, and when we freely do it, the world is a better place. There is a better flavour to the world and to life. He goes on to say, you are the light of the world. You don't hide the light under a cover. The light is to disperse the darkness and bring light to the household so people can see and see their way around. A light must shine or it's useless. In the same way, if you don't let your light shine, the light that is in you, that is you, the light of Christ, the light of God perhaps, that shines in you, this being that is you, if that's not allowed to shine into the world, then the world is a little dimmer. And for all of us, there are choices and decisions we make about what we will do and who we are that maybe dim the light that is us. But there's also the potential for others to overwhelm us, to oppress us, to abuse us, to put us down. And Jesus is saying that's not right. He's saying that all of us should be allowed to flourish, to shine our light, to be the salt, the flavourful salt in the world. And he goes on to talk about, I guess allude to what will come further in this Sermon on the Mount, about building bridges and fences, bridges versus building barriers and fences. The way that religion often is used to define and keep people out or keep people in. And it's not just religion, it's politics, it's ideologies, it's belief systems of all sorts. We use it to keep people in and out. And he says when religion does that, when faith does that, it's bad. And it's exclusive. And it's not what I'm on about. And he invites us into a way that is inclusive and generous. A way that builds a community where everyone's light shines, where everyone is the flavour, provides flavour to this community, where everyone receives what they need and gives what they can, and we share together and flourish in the world. And we make the world a better place. The other reading that I've been looking at is from Isaiah, 2,500 years ago. This prophet is speaking into this people, and they're saying, look at us, look what we've done. We fast and we sacrifice, we do this, and our worship is top notch, and all of that. Where's God? God's not listening. What's God on about? And Isaiah comes back at them and says, you stupid people, what is the worship, the sacrifice, the fasting that God wants? You just do it so you can look good and feel good and then go off and do injustice tomorrow. He says what God desires is people who will break the yoke of injustice in the world, who will stand up against what's unjust, unfair and wrong. Who will share their bread with the hungry and invite the homeless into their homes, who will feed and clothe the naked and the homeless and the marginalised, and invite them into the community where they can belong and where they can flourish, where they can find life. And when you do this, your light will shine and the world will be better. There's this story I once read of a missionary. He was headed towards this land where he would share his gospel of Jesus. But he was shipwrecked in a storm and washed up on the shore. He was battered and bruised and not in a good state. The indigenous people found him and they took him to their village and they cared for him. And when he came good, he lived amongst them. He listened to their stories and learned their language. He built a hut on the edge of the village and was part of it. He surprisingly didn't say anything about his God, about Jesus, the Bible. He just lived as one of them. When someone was hungry or their crops failed or whatever, he would offer food. When someone lost their hut or home in a storm or fire or whatever, he would help rebuild it. When people were sick, he sat with them and tended to their wounds or their illness, even through the night, caring for them. When people grieved or were lost or alone or wanted to talk, he would sit and listen. In every way, he offered them love and care. One day, these missionaries turned up further up the coast. They got off their ship and met the indigenous people who welcomed them. They went and they stayed with them, and after a bit they shared their stories of Jesus. And the more they shared these stories of Jesus, the more animated the local people became. And the missionaries couldn't understand it. What do you mean? And they're saying, this Jesus, we know this Jesus. We know he's been here with us. He's lived with us for a long time. They said, well, what do you mean? You didn't know his name before we turned up. No, but we know who he is. And in the end, they said, come. And they took the missionaries down the coast to this other village. And there they introduced him to their long-lost friend. They were shocked that this man, this missionary whom they thought was dead 20 years ago, was here alive. And they're further surprised that the native people, the indigenous people, called him Jesus. He lived his life in a way that shone the light of God, the love of God, the inclusion of God into the lives of these people. He brought peace and harmony to their village and the other villages. He helped them to flourish, and they knew the presence of God in their midst. And I think this is what Jesus is trying to say to us. God is with us. The way of true faith and religion is to feed the hungry, is to care for the poor and the outcast, is to welcome the lost and the lonely, those who are different, into a community that is inclusive and flourishing, where people share generously of who they are and what they have. And out of this, the world flourishes and light shines and life is better. Will you join this way of Jesus?